Hi, my name is Samuel Johnson. I'm from Minnesota. I'm a potter and I'm a member of Artaxis and also on the board of directors. I make pottery, mostly wood-fired pottery, and this is an example of a coil and paddled jar with a crack through the center of it. The crack happened during the firing, and the surface is um, a byproduct of the fire and the clay interacting with one another. I make all kinds of pots. This is an example of a pot that I thought would be great in the kitchen. It's a small pot, a little flat dish that can hold onions in this case, or things for cooking, sauces, that type of thing. It has a nuka glaze, wood ash in my case, glaze. Um, I like to simplify forms when I'm designing. Um, I like to think about distilling an idea down to an essential form or simple concept. And then when making them, I like the idea of that simplicity becoming increasingly more complex by the interaction between my hand, the material, and the firing process, but importantly also the context in which the pots will be seen. Sometimes keeping things simple means re-envisioning a conventional form. So this is my version of a platter. It's basically a flat disc with a heavy rim that sits very low to the table. I'm interested in finding ways in which the firing can subtly affect the display of food or the way that the pot is used. In this case, you can see like a shadow pattern, a loading pattern as it happens to be, of a flower-like pattern in the center of this bowl. But this should all be subservient to the way in which the pots are used. So in this case, subtle, and I want the food to be center. This is what I call a drop vase. It's a cylindrical form that's literally dropped on the table to partially flatten and squish it. Then I add a neck to it. But this simple structure that's sort of altered by the complexity of those actions, by the dropping of the form, by the firing, I think is really dynamic. I love the tension that exists between something that's sort of structure and there's a disruption of that structure. This is a large vase based on a ship bottle. Some of the forms I make um, are made from earlier forms, antecedents that somehow have a kind of a poetic reference to me. So these bottles were used for travel, for keeping things from spilling. That's why it's such a wide bottom. I think there's a sort of elegance about them. And then when firing them, in this case, I'm adding burning embers to the surface that creates this rough and irregular surface. Another example of one of my glazes made from wood ashes gathered near where I live. It's another style of nuka ash glaze. Nuka is typically made out of rice straw, but I don't have an abundant source of that near where I live, so I use wood ashes and modify them to make glazes like this. This is a vase, again with the burning embers that have made a barnacle-like surface on the side. I'm not at all interested in things that are meant to seem like they're from the past. I want to make things that feel like they're out of time, separate from time. I want to make things that interact with um, the conditions in which they exist, the conditions in which they're made. Here, there's a kind of a ridge around the middle of this cup that catches the floating ash in the wood kiln, creating a kind of a ledge for the ashes to gather. But also just below that, you'll see a depression, and that's specifically for a person's thumb when using it. It gives the person a kind of special point of connection. Generally, the more still and simple the pot, the more I think it expresses the tension that exists between the material and the firing and the context. So I really aim for that in my work. This is a flask form that I consider to be a vase, but it's, again, earlier reference is a traveling flask, a container that would have held liquid for a traveler. I call it a pilgrim's flask. Vase that's um, has hard edges, sense of geometry to it. The inversion of a form sometimes is the way I construct or designed. So this is an example of two cone-like structures put together at the center to create a small bud vase. Another example of that flat platter. The edges of this platter are scraped with a tool where I'm not exactly decorating, but exposing pattern, structure, and the disruption of that structure. So when I create those lines, the tool I use tears and rips the surface, exposing the specific interaction and also the way that the material responds to that forceful act. Thanks a lot for listening to my presentation. I hope you have a great day.